Hello and welcome back. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Today I have a view of the age-old discussion, the M1 Garand versus the M14, where the development of the M1 Garand into the M14 is primarily what this video is going to cover. So we're going to start off with the historical context development of the M1, going into the M14, and then when the M14 ceases production as the M16 comes on board, and then a point-by-point comparison of the two. Anyway, if that all sounds interesting to you, please stick around. That's coming up now. Okay, so let's start this off by doing a very quick abridged history of the two of these, starting of course with the M1 Garand. So this was designed by French-Canadian John C. Garand. Of course, everybody says Garand. Now, he would have worked with Springfield Armory throughout the 1920s and would have helped development of what would later become the U.S. rifle caliber .30 M1, or the M1 Garand as we know it today. Now, at that time, throughout the 1920s, the United States military was looking and transitioning from a traditional bolt action to a semi-automatic design. Throughout the 20s and then into the early 30s, there were trials of which the biggest competitors to the M1 Garand would have been a submission or early prototype semi-automatic rifles from Thompson, and also the Peterson semi-automatic rifle design. Now, eventually, of course, the M1 Garand would win and then begin production in 1937 by Springfield. They would have first, from 1937 to 1940, come out with a variation of what was known as the gas trap Garand, which is a little bit of a different operating system. You had sort of a scoop-shaped device up here at the front of the gas system, which would trap and redirect gases as they expanded outside the muzzle back through the gas system and then run a piston. From here back, it was pretty much the same design, but there was a lot of changes up here to the front. Now, in 1940, it was redesigned. The gas trap system was removed, and they came up with a traditional gas block system by replacing the front sight, the gas block, and the barrel. So from 1940 through the end of production, it would stay in that configuration, and any of the gas trap produced Garands would of course gone back and gotten retrofitted. If you have or know of a unmodified, unmolested gas trap M1 Garand, those are worth a phenomenal amount of money because they are very uncommon today. And now, shortly after this redesign in 1940, Winchester would have been awarded a contract to help production, and then Springfield and Winchester would have been the manufacturers of the M1 Garand throughout the remainder of World War II, ending in about 1945. Now, shortly after the end of World War II, of course, in 1950, we have the starting of the Korean War conflict, ranging from 1950 to 1953. Now, in 1953, you have two other firms coming on board. You have H&R, which is Harrington and Richardson, and then you have IHC, which is International Harvester Corporation. Now, Winchester ceased production at the end of World War II in 1945, but Springfield would resume production in 1952, and then total production of the M1 Garand would stop in 1957. So, again, Winchester stops in 1945, Springfield, H&R, and International Harvester stop in 1957. Now, the M1 Garand would stay in service. Of course, we had it through World War II, Korea, and even into Vietnam, and it would stay in general arsenal use. I mean, even today they're used in limited circumstances for training implements, ceremonial reasons, things like that. But by and large, their combat service would cease in 1957 at large. Now, just 2 years later, we do have the adoption of the M14, and actually what this is a Springfield Armory, modern Springfield Armory, which is not the same as the old U.S. Arsenal. M1A that I have sort of converted into an M14 sort of design. Now, this was actually manufactured in the early 1990s. It is a pre-ban in what would be known as the golden era to Springfield M1A collectors, these were pretty much made on all surplus M14 parts. So this is pretty much made on all TRW parts except for the receiver, which is cast by Springfield. So it's about as close as we could get. Now, there were some other manufacturers which would come out with a milled receiver, sort of civilian version M14, which you can get on the market today. Those are going to run you about $3,000-ish new, which are really nice facsimiles of the original M14, and those are designed to look more like the M14. Of course, in the Springfield lineup, you have the National Match variants and the loaded models and stuff like that, but the point of this video is not to talk about about the civilian M14, but I just wanted to give you that brief overview. So, in the interperiod between the M1 Garand and the M14, what did the Ordnance Department learn? Why did we go to the revisions we see in the M14? And I'll talk about specifically those revisions in a minute. So, in the Korean War, of course, the United States is fighting the Chinese, and the Chinese were very prone to doing these large-scale frontal assaults on usually fortified lines. A semi-automatic battle rifle was not as conducive to a more frontal assault type, widespread conflict sort of engagement type that we saw in Korea. Furthermore, after World War II, NATO had done testing to determine that statistically in a skirmish, the side that was able to produce a higher volume of fire, not necessarily accurate fire, but a higher volume of fire in general, was statistically more likely to win in a sort of a combat scenario. So taking these two schools of thought, we move into the ordnance wanting to move into a fully automatic or select fire battle rifle to put the machine gun capabilities into the hand of each single GI or make them their own sort of fighting force to amplify the volume of fire that's able to be produced. Now, along with that, we have, in the ordnance, we have a huge variety of different weapons. We have the grease gun, which is standard at the time as the submachine gun. We have the 1919 A4 and A6 is the standard issue belt-fed, the light and medium machine guns. We have the Browning BAR as a squad automatic rifle. We have the M1 Garand. We have the M1 carbine. And the idea was to take all these firearms and reduce them into one package that we could issue to everybody. So this was going to serve as the light machine gun, the medium machine gun, the infantry rifle, the submachine gun, the carbine. It was going to do it all. So everything was scaled down pretty much into this package. Now, the M1 Garand was chambered in 30-06. The M14 chambered in 308 or 7.62x51 NATO. So it was a sort of a, at the time, during the sort of interwar period, the 1950s, 1960s, interwar, but I'm talking between about World War II and Vietnam, we have most of the world going to a battle rifle configuration with the 7.62 NATO being the standard. So you have the L1A one in Britain, the variations of the FAL being developed all over the world. Like I said, Britain, Australia, Germany with the G3, you have Spain with the SETME Model C. So everybody's going to this standard 7.62x51, and the US would follow suit, adopting it in the M14. Now during the trials, it was actually looking probable that the US would have gone to an FAL variant, but instead they went with the M14 design. Now, there are basically some subtle changes where you move from the M1 Garand into the M14. Some of the big ones obviously being that the M14 is designed to take a detachable box magazine, 20 rounds here instead of an 8-round M-block clip. And here is an example of that 8-round clip. So that would be inserted through the top and go right here. It was internally seated on this M-block clip. Once your 8th round was expended, the clip would fly out the top, giving you the iconic ping noise that we all sort of equate with the M1 Garand rifle. Again, like I said, M14 detachable box magazine, so it made not only the capacity higher, but reloads much faster. The other big difference we already covered was the moving from a semi-automatic only to a select fire, so now fully automatic. And then the other thing is sort of the changing up of the gas system, which I'm going to bring this in for a point-by-point comparison and show you that a little bit closer. So you do have the gas block working on a gas system right back here, gas system right underneath the barrel. And now on the M14, everything is moved a little bit rearward. The front of the barrel is all more open on the M14 design. You have the adoption of a muzzle brake. Again, I'm going to go over this in a little bit of detail as we get into the close-ups. So other than that, internally they're very similar. They are gas operated with a rotating locking bolt. So from adoption in 1959 until about 1962, 1963, we start seeing the M14 phased out with the early adoptions and the early variants of the M16, the M16A1, which would be like the early 604, the early 603 being the XM16E1, so the M16 variants, when it was finally officially replaced by the M16 in 1967. So this would make the M14 the shortest lived surface rifle in US history at about 7 to 9 years. Now, of course, its standard issue would stop being replaced with the M16 variants in the sort of the mid to late 60s, but the M14 has actually stayed in service even until today, usually taking on more of a DMR, designated marksman's role. Ancillary support for force multipliers, you usually see them in the ERB stock configurations today. So they are still in limited use, and they still are in inventory with the US military. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the side-by-side, starting off with the weight of the M1 Garand rifle. So we are at 10 pounds, 6.6 ounces. And then the M14, 10 pounds, 1.5 ounces. So we are about 5 ounces lighter on the M14. Keep in mind a 20 round magazine as compared to an 8 round. So with the added ammunition in there, that'll pretty much be a wash on the weight. So pretty similar in terms of weight. So the M1 Garand has a 24-inch barrel and the M14 has a 22-inch barrel. So we are 2 inches lighter, or 2 inches shorter here. Now the muzzle brake on the M14 is about 2 inches. So with that, we have the similar width and barrel profile. But let's go ahead and take a look at the overall length. The M1 Garand's at 43.5. And the M14 is at 44.25. So just a little bit longer on the M14 profile. So similar in weight, similar in size. Barrel length, again, 2 inches shorter on the M1 Garand. I'm sorry, 2 inches shorter on the M14 with a 2-inch muzzle brake, giving it the same barrel profile. So bringing in the Garand a little bit closer for comparison, you are going to see two protecting ears on the front sight with a front blade. There is no type of muzzle brake. Now up here is the sort of the gas plug, which you do need a tool to remove that to access. You can take that off. And then you can take off the whole front gas assembly and front sight base, which allows you access to the handguard here. Now this is the gas block as well, so gases, as the round travels through here, gases are redirected through the gas block and then down through the gas tube, which runs your action, which when we get to disassembly, I'll show you that a little bit more. Now moving back, there is it's a three-piece stock set where you have a handguard piece here, which is its own unique piece. You have a handguard piece here, which is its own unique piece, and then you have the stock here. Now the front end of the M14 is very iconic. Of course, you have little protective ears on the front sight, which is a front post. Again, there is the about 2-inch long flash hider there. Now on the commercial M1As, after the assault weapons ban, like production up until today, you're not going to find the bayonet lug. So if you see a bayonet lug on an M1A like this, you know it is either a pre-ban gun or somebody has retrofitted an original sight base. The barrel, of course, is like we talked about before. You don't have any type of handguard set up here, and the gas block has moved all the way towards the back, which comes down here. There's your gas plug. Gas tube runs underneath the stock. This is a 2-piece stock set with your walnut or birch stock here, and then this is sort of a fibrite or if you will, a Bakelite type handguard. Okay, now let's move back into the actions of both, and actually from a top view, they're going to look very similar. Of course, you have the M1 Garand here, and then the M14/M1A here. So this is the operating rod/charging handle, which is the same on both, rotating bolt on both, and then the rear sight apertures are the same. This is a peep sight, and all of your windage and elevation adjustments are handled right back here at the back of the rifle. Manufacturer's markings are going to be back here. Now, as we talked about, the M1 Garand was manufactured by Springfield, Winchester, H&R, and International Harvester locally in the United States. Of course, Beretta would have made some of these, you know, in Italy, and that's a kind of a whole other story. And then these would have been made by Springfield, Winchester, H&R, and then TRW, which is Thompson Ramo Woodridge. TRW is the colloquially known term from collectors. This is a Springfield, modern commercial Springfield manufactured receiver, which is a cast part, but all the other internals are actually made by TRW. That's the bolt carrier, the bolt, the op rod, the barrel is Galesio, Illinois, and then the trigger control grip. Now moving to the back of the stock configuration is also very similar. You're going to have a trapdoor on both. Now the iconic thing about the M14 is the infamous shoulder thing that goes up, which basically this was derived because, again, remember the M14 was going to also serve in the light machine gun role, so to give a little bit more support to your, you know, if you're running this in fully automatic fire with a bipod. Now the BAR had this exact type of shoulder attachment on it, which is kind of where they got this design. So it really goes to prove that this is meant to be a squad automatic rifle, if you will, and to work in that role. Okay, let's go ahead and get into disassembly, starting here with the M1 Garand. Of course, you're going to start by checking that you are clear, and we are. And I'll show you the bolt will lock open to the rear. Talking about loading, you'll put your M block clip right down here, push it into place, and then when you move, I'm actually not doing this with live ammo, but that'll push forward. Now that, if you push down here, and your thumb's in the way, that'll close on your hand, giving you the popular Garand thumb. You'll basically put in your ammunition with the flat of your hand holding back the operating rod. When everything's pushed in and starts to move forward like this, it'll be held kind of slightly back by the first round. You can either just let go if it'll push it by itself, or you may have to help push it into place, but it's basically your assembly there. Now from this position, I'm gonna go ahead and you can lay it on its back. You're gonna pull back on the trigger guard. And here I'll show you, there's a little milled ring here. This is a milled part. There's a ring here. That was so you could stick the tip of a bullet in there and help to use it as leverage. Later M1 Garands, the late 1944-45, would go to a stamped version without that ring, which is also the same version used by the M14 throughout the entirety of its production. So I'll show you that in a minute on the M14. But anyway, grab and pull back. That'll allow the trigger guard to sort of swing open. You can grab that and that takes out your entire fire control group. From there, that was the only thing mating the stock to the receiver, so you can go ahead and pull up on the stock and set it aside. And then there is the disassembled M1 Garand. You can go a little bit of a step further. You can remove the guide rod and spring, you can remove the operating rod and then the bolt. I'm not going to do that. But as you can see, the operating rod sort of acts as a piston, like a long stroke gas piston, which connects up here to the front of the gas block. So when gases are reverted down here, it'll push on this piston rod that I'm moving right here, which actuates your operating rod, which moves your bolt carrier back and forth. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at the disassembly of the M14. Now, this is going to function very much like the M1 Garand, where when it's empty, it will lock open like this. Now, attached here, you would could have a stripper clip guide. This does not have that on that. You would remove that in order to put on a scope mount. So, previous owner would have taken that off, but you could actually top this off with stripper clips, or you could just remove the mag entirely and then put in a new loaded magazine. So that'll drop just like that. Again, rotating locking bolt just like on the M1 Garand. Now just like on the M1, here is the trigger guard, and I'll bring this in. That is the later stamped version, so the late M1 Garands would have the same thing. There's no little assistant ring, if you will, in the back. This would have been stamped. And all of the M14s would have had this type of trigger guard. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and you're gonna pull back and then up, just like on the M1 Garand, and this is very tight. And then that will allow you to lift up and out your trigger group. Then from there, you can go ahead and lift the stock. And that was in there tight. There we go. And then from here, you can see the operating system is almost exactly the same as on the M14s. So gases will come down here into this gas block and actuate this short piston you see moving in there right here, which will slam into the op rod, forcing it back into cycle. So sort of a short stroke gas piston operation there. So again, very similar to the M1 Garand. Anyway, guys, I will leave you off there. Again, if you have any questions, please leave those down in the comment section. And if you enjoyed this video, please let me know by hitting that like button, and also consider subscribing to my channel and hitting that bell notification button so you can see more content as I post it. So anyway, guys, I will leave it off to you there. I am Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana. You are watching Marksman TV, and I will see you next time.